Okay, so I hope anyone can see my screen. But is it visible?
It is visible.
Okay, great.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, by the way, thanks everyone for joining and paying attention to the webinar. So some time ago, I promised you to conduct some sort of it's partially webinar, partially Q&A about the entire process of passing the interview. The most important thing that today I mostly will cover the typical project interview. How is it going? But which steps we can divide the majority of technical interviews, and that it doesn't mean that the given information will be applicable, fully applicable for the upcoming Core JS interview, but some of the recommendations could be extremely useful for you for the upcoming one, as well as for the future project interviews that most likely you need to pass. So here is the main intention of our today's session is to get a brief look at the entire process um, and which parts it consists of, as well as we're going to see how we can improve our answers. I'll give you some tips at the each stage and for what you should be prepared of. So I believe some of you already has a basic experience of passing the interview. At least you had one during the end of the stage one. But still, let's review the process one more time um, to see how's it going and how to behave during the interview. First of all, uh, let's see how can we structure the interview by the steps. So that's a typical project interview uh, that could be applicable for the majority of cases. So first of all, since the interviewer doesn't know about yourself, so most likely the first question that you'll receive will be to tell something about yourself. Um, so here you can include some background experience about the skills, the characteristics, um, as well as what you're expecting about the position you're applying for. Next, obvious, the main interview part. Since we're applying for software engineers, it's technical part. For QA engineers, it could be different. Also for business analysis, it's also different. But the main idea is for us, we are focusing on the technical part. So in most cases, it's consists of theoretical and coding part. Sometimes it could be mixed with each other. So it doesn't mean that whenever you answered a couple of theoretical questions, then you start thinking, okay, if we pass over to the coding part, the theoretical part has been finished, but that's not always the case. But at the same time, we should be prepared for giving the answers for theoretical questions, giving the detailed answers of your understanding of some terms, some concepts of this or that particular technology that is going to be widely used across the project. Okay. And the final part is the Q&A with your interviewer. Um, so in because because of the final part, I wouldn't say that the project interview is an exam. It's definitely not an exam. And I would like to ask you to start thinking of an interview as as a regular conversation. So let's say you gathered with Maybe you gathered with some more experienced guys and you're exchanging the knowledge, right? Technically, the purpose of the interview is to identify how well you fit with your skill set to perform the regular tasks on the project. But let's think on that's the interview is just a regular conversation. I know that the process is nervous uh, for at least candidates. So that's not quite true to think that the interview process is the stress only to the candidates who applies for the position. I would reveal a secret that the interview process is also stress for the interviewers as well because I'm telling you as a person who also conducts number of interviews and you have to believe me that's stress for everyone because the interviewer also needs to think of a set of questions that should be asked and uh, could help interviewers to identify who you are, uh, whether you possess enough knowledge to apply for a position, and so on. So that's stress for everyone, and you have to believe me. So here is a note. Okay, sometimes the structure of the interview could be entirely different. There are rare cases, but the given structure is applicable for the most case scenario. Sometimes the technical part could be united with both theoretical and coding part. For example, I had an experience in the past. Whenever I passed technical interview, I was given a huge coding task. Let's say to implement the news feed that's is supposed to display the news cards, should have uh, several buttons, the comment section, and by giving the huge coding task, an interviewer uh, could identify how well I will cope with the task, uh, how will I think come up with the solution, and how well I know the theoretical basis. So that's why um, the structure is just for your reference. This is the most case scenario, and the majority of interview goes with by the following scenario. But you should keep in mind that it's not always the case. Uh, so we're just moving on to what needs to be done before the interview. And here we start with some small tips for you. We're going to review each of the parts of the interview and see how to cope with them well. Okay, so our journey starts even before the interview. And here it's also important to be aware of several things. For example, I already mentioned that the interview is stress for everyone. Um, so that's maybe that fact could help you for not being nervous before the interview or even during the interview. Uh, Also, most important thing that you shouldn't be late for any project interview, since being late could be an indicator for the interviewer that something goes wrong, and it could affect actually the interview results. So, but we know that force majeure situations could happen, and in that case, important thing is if you see that for due to some circumstances you're not able to come to the interview in time, it's okay. Everyone has understands that something could happen, and in that case, if you warn your interviewer that you're running late for a couple of minutes, due to some reasons, that's okay. But if you come late without letting know your interviewer, that's actually a red flag for him, which could, well, being a trigger for rejecting you for application because, well, that's not really good. Um, I, well, like before I prepared for the presentation that just I made for today's webinar, I haven't encountered this piece of advice. I don't know why, but based on my own experience, um, whenever you're getting prepared for the interview, uh, you're always like trying to read a lot, try to recall everything to ensure that you know every aspect that could be asked during the interview. And for example, if you see, okay, maybe we can refer to our interview list for the Core.js interview, and you actually see that the list is quite huge. Yeah, and if you try to remember everything, that's really crazy to know everything, but at the same time, if you see that you don't have enough time to prepare for the interview, please don't try to read or to recall everything. Right before the interview, try not to think about the list of the questions at least 1 or 2 hours prior the interview, because it will get your nervous a lot. You'll and remember the first point from the current slide: don't be nervous. And for such reason, not to get nervous, to get uh, to start the interview with a good mood. So I strongly recommend you not to read or recall anything right before the beginning of the interview, since it could affect the entire process of giving answers. Uh, okay, moving on. I don't think it's quite actual nowadays, at least before getting into the pandemic, most of the companies used to work from the office, and that's why if a candidate come to the office, um, it's okay to grab a cup of tea or water right to the meeting room. That's completely okay. And even though if you think that you are nervous, just having a glass of water near you, it's a good option. I don't think it's actual for nowadays, but in any case, sometimes in the future, if you encounter the interview that takes place in the office, so you know what to do. Okay, that's all about things before the interview. The most important thing is the third one. So please remember this. I believe it could help you a lot. Okay, so we're going right into the interview process. Interview, as I mentioned, start with um, letting the interviewer know who you are because he barely knows you. In most cases, what the interviewer knows about you is exactly the information that is mentioned in your CV. And in our case, it's also a case in, while preparing for the core JS interview. So most likely, an interviewer will pay attention to your CV that you prepared during the stage one. And while applying for a job, for a project interview, it also could be an option where the interviewer is also getting prepared for the interview by knowing something about you. And most likely, um, whenever you start speaking about your background, about your experience in the past. So here I mentioned like the typical structure of the response. If you got the question, tell me a little bit about yourself. So here are some structures that could help you with answering that question. So the important thing here is that even though it's the intro of your interview and that's an opportunity to tell about yourself, the most important thing, please give only that information that is relevant for a project, for a position you're applying for. It's not a good option to tell about the entire career path or entire bio from your life. Or let's say if you started working in IT and previously you were working um, for a major bank network or any other any other jobs that are not relevant for IT. So I don't think the interviewer is ready to hear that. So the only thing that needs to be announced is whatever is relevant for the current project. So that's why if you have some experience in IT in the past, so it will be good to mention about your career path. So even though if you just finished the RS school, it's also your career path. So you're gain a lot of experience here by accomplishing the challenging tasks. So that's why it's good also mentioned during the interview. Um, about the skills. So I I don't know whether you encountered such terms like soft and hard skills in any way. Let's just quickly recap in case if you're not really aware. What what are the hard and soft skills? So hard skills are easy to measure because hard skills relates to the technical skills. So it's like another naming of it. Hard skills are knowing knowing technologies, programming languages, libraries, and so on. So hard skills it's could be referred to the technical ones, and it's related to the tool set that you're working on. And with soft skills, it's quite harder because it's not quite possible to measure them completely. It's, in other words, for simplicity and not to load for you with lots of information. Let's say that soft skills are something that could characterize you as an employee. Let's say every person has its own character. Sometimes he could be stubborn, he could be lots of energetic. Okay. In our life scenario, soft skills could be referred to something that is relevant for accomplishing a job. Let's say um, you're ready for constant learning. Maybe you possess some managerial skills, some managerial characteristics by um, being able to manage the team, to take on a leadership on something. So, in other words, there are lots of soft skills, and I will not like get too deeper into this. But for now, um, let's assume that hard skills are technologies and soft skills are your characteristic, your ability to do your job and in which way. stay with such a term, but in any way, if you require to know a bit more, so let's uh, leave the link to the additional materials that just to get more about it. Um, an intro part of the interview could also be used as an opportunity for you to know your future project better. So at the beginning, in most cases, an interviewer could uh, present his current project in terms of which domain it is, in which area they're working on. They could work for the business solution or for uh, insurance, why not? Um, and they could present or tell some words about their customer, the technology that's used in the project, something that could await you in case if you pass the interview successfully. And this is a good part to ask some questions that could be relevant to the current project. Let's say you want to know a project more. You want to know what exact technology are used. You also maybe want to know what will be your responsibilities. For example, and so the interviewer tell you about some project, but maybe you want to know more. What will be your daily routine? For instance, um, you'll be applied for a team which implements some crucial feature for a customer in a particular area. For example, they want to add the admin panel for the entire system, for example. And like you shouldn't regret, would say, if something it's not suitable for you in case if you don't ask that question just because you're agreed with such conditions. So please do not hesitate to ask such questions to the interviewer to get more information of where you're going to work. Because even though you passed the interview successfully, but it turned out that work condition doesn't suit for you. For example, sometimes it is required to work in a late evening just because of huge difference in the time zone, and not everyone wants to work with such conditions. So that's why ask more questions as you can, and those questions should be prepared in advance. Just a sec, sorry. Okay, so perhaps we're done with such part. Let's move on uh, to the main part of actually to the main part of the interview. Uh, so in our case, it will be theoretical part. It's the most common scenario whenever an interviewer is trying to figure out whether you possess enough knowledge about the technologies that are used in the project. So that's why he needs to know more to ask some theoretical questions to identify whether you get at the current field. And definitely there are some hints that could be considered right here that could possibly help you to come up with the answer, and if not, how to buy time, and maybe to make a process a bit better. Um, First of all, uh, it's completely okay um, if you don't remember anything. Uh, for instance, you get asked about the inheritance in JavaScript. So you do remember the basic concepts of OOP, or even you know how to implement the classes in JavaScript, but you barely remember about how exactly the prototypal inheritance works. Let's consider this example. Okay, so to let's assume you were given such a question. So first of all, don't try to think on the full answer of the question from the very beginning to the very end. Um, if you get silent during the interview, that could be an indicator that you don't possess much knowledge about the question that had been announced. Try to give at least some of the assumptions. In case if you need some time to think to structure your future answer, that's completely okay if you ask an interviewer to give you some time to think on an answer. That's a common practice that could give you a chance to concentrate if you or it's also could happen whenever you get too nervous and that situation prevents you from giving an answer. You can ask interviewer to give you some time to think on an answer, to relax, and then to get on with the answer. Okay, so let's say you got some assumptions. So, okay, I know how to create a class. Maybe since the ES5 way of class creation refers to the object that's called prototype, maybe I could give some assumption that um, the inheritance mechanism works in such a way, for example. In case if the answer to the question looks for the interviewer incomplete, so most likely he will give you an extra question to the same topic to get a bit more understanding about how do you know data that area. Uh, and again, to remind that about not being silent. Um, Maybe some of you are not familiar or haven't even passed the interview in English. Maybe it could also happen. Um, there is an extra tip here that I haven't mentioned. Um, Try to think on common phrases in case if you want to give some answer or you want to buy time when you're thinking. Um, you could also like um, form your phrasal bank. Maybe I have somewhere when I was preparing for the customer interview, and I believe it could also be helpful for you. So as an additional material after the webinar will be over, so I believe I could send to you as well. Why not? Okay, do I have what do we have here? So I believe I everything covered. Uh, Again, it's completely okay not to know everything that is asked during the interview. Okay, in case if you know at least some assumptions during the interview, during the question that has been asked to you, so perhaps you could try to come up with some assumptions on how do you understand this area. But sometimes you could be asked with a question that is completely not familiar for you. And in that case, if you don't have at least a basic understanding of a question or you're not able to answer it at all, it's a good practice just to let the interviewer know that, well, unfortunately, that's a quite difficult question for me. Unfortunately, I haven't encountered it in the past. So just that's important. It's okay, and that's really great to be honest during the interview because sometimes the questions could be asked too complex. they could be too complex. For instance, you are not familiar with performance optimization, and instead of like taking your and interviewer time for trying to come up with the answer from your head, so perhaps that could be better just to say that you haven't been working with the performance optimization, and the interviewer will see that you're honest person. That could be a plus whenever he will form a feedback. So that's also could be an option. And again, this particular tip uh, will be in any part of the interview. Uh, do not hesitate to ask interviewer in case if you don't understand something in terms of understanding the entire question. So if you asked something and you barely get it, or maybe you hesitate that you understood it correctly, also please ask the interviewer in case if you need to know more about the question that is asked. Okay, so with theoretical part, I believe um, that's everything that I wanted to share. Maybe there are some other tips, but to my mind, these that I'm presenting are crucial ones. Okay, coding part. Also, an interesting thing in terms of passing the interview. Um, but again, also there are some tips here for you how to come up with the solution to a coding task in an effective way. Um, First, again, before coming up with a solution, please ensure that you understood the task correctly, whether you're aware about all the inputs and results that needs to be get from the particular task. Because in case if you understood the task incorrectly, that could lead to not completing the coding task just because you haven't understood the requirements. So in case if you are hesitating, so please do not be afraid to ask the interviewer uh, about the task requirements that needs to be done. Um, the most common thing, so whenever you were given for some coding task and it looks for at the first glance it looks for you too complex to solve and it requires lots of time to think. That's okay, and the first impression could be wrong, so that's why let's break down the entire process. First, you're given the uh, the requirements for the task. First, ensure that you understood it correctly. Then do not rush for writing down the answer, the implementation immediately. Take some time to think. So maybe you could find a solution. Next, could help you to organize your solutions. So to break down the particular task into several steps. Well, after reviewing, so maybe we could look at the example of how can we solve coding tasks during the interview. So breaking down into steps. Uh, well, here I wanted like to highlight because this point is too crucial here. So you could write the code in complete silence, but it could lead to not knowing too much about the way you think or the way you're solving this particular task. And it could lead also to having an extra questions after you implemented the task. Uh, it also could help you in case if you don't know all the ways or you got lost during the process. So you could help the interviewer a lot and yourself as well whenever you implement the task to announce all the steps that you're taking uh, to complete it. Um, so, for example, well, we will show you in a minute. Um, let's see what we have here. Uh, Perhaps when you do a regular coding, well, accomplishing the course task, or maybe you already have some experience doing some functionality, um, you probably are trying to find the best solution that is possible in accordance with your current experience. That's not actually the case in terms of the interview in such a way, in case if you are trying to find the best solution, the best and optimized solution for a coding task, so sometimes it could lead you for not having solution at all, because sometimes when you are trying to think everything to make the solution ideal, sometimes you get stuck, and that's could be an indicator that you're not able to solve the coding task. Instead, if you're not able to come up with the good solution, uh, you can easily implement the direct one using like deprecated things, whatever you know. But because having some solution, at least some solution for a coding task is much better than having nothing. So also keep in mind that could help you a lot. Um, and in case if you're finished with your implementation, so possibly you could think on how can you optimize it. This is the optional step for you, the last one. Uh, But in case if you know how to improve your code, that's a big plus for you. And let's assume that we were given with some sort of coding task during the interview. For example, as the input, we expect to see the following string with the characters coming in such a way as an input, and as an output we want uh, to get something like this. The string that will consist of the number of characters and the particular character. Okay, so that's also could be an option. Okay, so let's assume that I'm not too experienced in solving coding tasks and passing the interviews at all. So for me, at the first glance, it could look a bit complex. So maybe let's switch to the light theme just for your convenience. Okay. So maybe that would be much more convenient for you. Okay, let's assume that we have such coding task. Okay, so
B is two times, right?
uh yes, B is two times. 3 times A, 2 times B, and 3 times C. Okay, you see, that's your code well. So you don't really get the the output, or maybe an interviewer made a mistake. So you immediately ask the question, and that's really great. Okay, we assume that to identify the number of the particular characters, so most likely we want to iterate over all of them. Okay, so the most direct solution could be just go for each character that we have in our input. So this is the direct solution, for example, right? Okay, so we're iterating over the characters, and we need to store the number of occurrences somewhere. So maybe somewhere we need to store a map, for example, right? It could be any, it could be an object. We can also create a map, why not? But let's stick with the regular object, for example. Okay, we iterate over each particular symbol, and we want to assign uh, the occurrence in our map. For example, let's say, uh, okay, I don't, for now, I'm not really aware how to implement the how to implement it in ideal way. So most probably I will do something like this. So for example, if I don't have occurrences at all, uh, I will like try to refer to it. Um, I will write down something like this. So this is the direct solution that firstly comes to my mind, and that's not ideal. So I'm just showing you an example, okay? Because that's called is okay for the interview. So most likely I will write down the one in case if not. So maybe I'll do something like this. Okay. And at the end, I will have the object where the key will be my char and the value will be the number of occurrences, for example. And I need some way, how can I form a string, for example? Okay, so most likely I want to know about all the keys I write down to our map. So most likely I want to do something like this. Object keys. Let's grab all of them. Okay.
But
Also
you should,
maybe
I think you should revert it if else logic.
yes. And so first you're trying to think how to accomplish it till the end. And whenever you're writing the code, so most likely you're not get too much attention to the details. So whenever but okay, so we could like continue by forming the solution, but the I hope that you got the main idea. So whenever I was given the task, okay, and I implemented in such a way that first comes to my mind, and then whenever I finished with it, I look at it one more time and start thinking, what here could be improved. Okay, let's see. We could simplify this if else statements, and maybe I can use ternary operator, for example, like, and maybe before uh, instead of these lines of code, most likely I want to use array reduce. That could be helpful here as well. And you are trying to find a way how to make the solution better. But in any way, the main idea was if you were given with the coding task, try at least to come up with the first solution that comes to your mind. It could not be ideal. And the example of this code, okay, I will never write like this in a production. So I believe you are aware of it. But for the interview, it's okay because you solve the coding task, not in ideal way, it's not optimized, but still you accomplished it, and it's much more better than taking too much time to come up with the ideal one. Okay, so I hope that I coped with the task for giving an example of how it's better like to come with solving coding task. So if you might be noticed, whenever I uh, write the code, I whenever I was thinking on something, I was announcing of each steps that could help me to acquire to get the result. Okay, to iterate over all letters, to have a map. So all the steps that comes to your mind, it would be great if you announce all of them to the interviewer. So that's an interviewer will have an understanding, the way of thinking, the way of coming up with solution, and most likely he could help you with something in case uh, he's or she sees that you're stuck with something. Um, okay, so for coding part, I believe we are okay here. Um, so the last thing, don't be afraid to ask in case if you don't really get about the uh, the inputs, the requirements for the coding task, and maybe if during the implementation you forgot something. So please don't be afraid to ask anything during the entire interview. Um, I'm not like calling you for asking about the general questions, but also about the question that you've been asked. So maybe you don't understand something. So that would be really great if you will ask anything um, to your interviewer. Okay, the last step uh, of the interview, whenever you're done with the main part, with the coding tasks, and you're right about to finish the interview. That also could be the chance, the opportunity to ask something that you haven't asked during the first part. There are not so many tips here, so but the most important one, again, I repeated it over and over again. But here, the main idea is to ask anything that really cares you, because if you don't do it during the interview, so perhaps it could be too late. Well, okay. So in the most cases, so most likely you want to ask something about the project, about maybe you want to ask how much it will take for the interviewer to form a feedback, to get back to you with the results. That also could be possible. Um, so I don't think I could come up with all of the possible options, but you need to know what should be asked to the interviewer, and most importantly, in advance. And I forgot one important thing to mention, that the the interview does not mean that the interviewer will be only one person. If you're applying for a project, most likely there could be several ones. For instance, the project manager, team lead of the project, and some of the developers that could help conducting the interview. So in so I encountered like up to three persons, up to people during the interview, and that's completely okay. And please don't be afraid of having too much people during the interview, because in most cases, the active interviewer will be only one. So let's assume that project manager wants to let get you know about the project itself, which technologies are used, which ceremonies are used, methodologies, something about project related, and he could also be a person who answers the project related questions about your future position and anything that could bother you at the right time. But in the most case, I encountered only one person among three of them who actually asks the questions during the interview. So you should be prepared for having several people during the interview. So that's not applied for the courteous interview. Obviously, it will be only one person, but you should also be prepared that during the interview will be several people carrying the process. Okay, last but not least thing for you. So whenever you accepted for a position, so got the positive feedback, I don't think it's requires much attention here. But let's assume that you've been rejected or you got not too much positive feedback that you expected. So what to do? First, definitely is not the end of the life. Why so? Because it's a great experience for you. Uh, more interviews you pass, more experience you gain, and that's really works. Just because each interview could be a great chance to identify your current gaps that prevents you for application um, to a particular project, or maybe as the software engineer that's they're looking for. So bypassing multiple interviews, so you encountered some challenges that enforces you to think harder, and you'll definitely be better prepared with the next interview. So you already know what you need to expect. And that's why by passing multiple interviews, even though you each time gets rejected, that's completely okay. Let's treat the failed interview. So maybe not think as a failed interview, but the interview, the process, the event that's helped you to get yourself better, to know better about your weaknesses or strengths that you need to focus on whenever you'll be preparing for the next interviews. Um, and also, it's not quite obvious thing that you could be rejected not only because you don't fit into their expectations. Sometimes the reason could be different, and obviously you will not get know what's the exact reason for your rejection. But you also need to know that if you get rejected from the interview, it could also like be because they maybe already found another candidate, or maybe a customer wanted to hire one extra developer in their team, but for some reason he simply just changed his mind. Just maybe he counts the budget, and at the last moment he think, okay, maybe it's not a good idea. So even though if you get rejected, so let's not think why it should so. Uh, if you think that during the interview you identified your gaps, you know that some of the areas need to be focused on, then it's could be a great start to start being prepared for the next interview even better because you know what you are expected. Okay, so I believe this is it for what I wanted to share with you today. So first of all, thanks for your attention, and let's stop for a couple of minutes in case if you have some questions to ask for me. So let's discuss all of them together. Well, first of all, I would like to let you know that for sure, many of the courses that's intended for preparation for the interview are a way a bit longer that's the webinar that is given today, obviously. But here I wanted like to make a brief, concise information for you that could be helpful for getting started with the interviews. Obviously, by the time you'll start gaining the experience and you'll know the process better. But to my mind, those points are way crucial to kickstart passing the interviews. Okay, and meanwhile, I see the raised hands. States, please go ahead.
Thank you for your webinar and for your information. I believe that practicing and doing the examples that the one you show um, is the better is the best way to prepare for the interviews, because theoretically you may know the problem, but in practice you cannot solve it the way the interviewer is expected.
Yes, exactly, and that's why I was keeping repeating the important note that in case if you don't fully get what interviewer is expecting for you, it's better to ask. But yeah, thanks for the feedback. So maybe you want to know more about some of the aspects from today's webinar. Maybe you want to ask something additionally.
Can I start?
Go ahead.
Okay, great. Listen, okay, so I have questions. From the get-go, it's more like a project-based interview, but my question is, I don't know if it's a difference between like European countries, like is how should I say it? Um, for a junior developer, right? Uh, uh,
So yeah.
I think
So
you got my idea.
yes, perhaps I got your idea. So let me rephrase it a bit. So which sets of theoretical questions could be asked during the interview for a junior software engineer, right?
For example, yes.
For instance, okay, so you already have this list with the Core.js interview, and to my mind, it's a perfect example of the listing of questions for a junior software engineer because it consists lots of the topics, including OP, design patterns. So whenever you were preparing for the interview, so you could base on this particular list or as I do whenever I was preparing for the interviews, is using learn javascript.info and just looking the chapters one by one. And you may be surprised sometimes whenever I looking at this website over and over again, and with each interview, I discover a new topics that weren't for me too familiar. So, answering the first one, so the listing of this and what is expected during the core jazz interview is a great example of the question that could be asked for a junior software engineer position because well experience shows like that is
Okay, so for junior position, that's still like project-based interviews, right?
of course.
Okay, great. That's good to know.
So,
Second,
so the example of today, so we were discussing about the interview itself. It could be an interview for a company for a particular project. So, if you will work for a product company that develops their own products, there will be a company interview. Whenever you work for an outsource company, so you definitely will have the entrance interview and interview for a particular project. So, to my mind, there is no much differences among all of them.
Mm-hmm. And the task that you are showing. So it's like go to Codewars or Lead Code and just like keep practicing those.
Yeah, that's a general recommendation for how being better prepared for recording part.
Okay, and another question is, for example, if I am going for the product company, right? The questions for like what exactly are we supposed to ask an interviewer? Like in that case, like if you or if they already like listed the requirements that they expect from you for this position, like what do what do you
Okay,
ask them?
so perhaps I got the idea. So, in the most cases, whenever you were applying for a company or for a project, there is a listing of the requirements for a future position. For instance, know this or that technologies to be familiar with um, some other tool set. And also, the common practice is to mention the section is called nice to have. It means that, for example, a future project use GraphQL for making requests. And I'm pretty sure that you are not familiar with GraphQL, but for the project, it's okay if you are not familiar because it's nice to have. But if you already possess the knowledge about GraphQL, that's a big plus for you. If they will start looking at other candidates, so most likely he will take you since you already know about it. But that's nice to have, and that's okay if you haven't been worked previously. So, the questions that could be asked for, during the interview could be any. And as I mentioned, that's not an exam. So the listing here that I will presenting over and over again, it's just for your reference. If you want to review the topics from the core JS, which definitely for a junior software engineer, the core JS asked way more frequently than, for example, some framework-based questions, let's say React or Angular, because they expect that a junior knows, possesses strong knowledge about core.js and has hands-on experience in frameworks. So I believe I answered your question.
Okay, my question is another then. For how long it
Okay.
will be like this? At what point do they stop like making so much like pressure on Core.js questions?
So in your case, if you apply for a junior, so the core JS will be the main topic that's will be asked. For how long the interview will last, so it also depends. The most common case is 1 hour and a half. In most cases, interviewers are limited and tied to the timeline, so it means that your interview will not take too long. So in most cases, it's 1 hour and a half. So it's the most common case. Sometimes interview could last even 40 minutes. For instance, some of the projects could not get deeper dive into asking theoretical questions. And I encountered the interview where my interviewer was asking only about which technologies you're familiar with. Have you used AWS, for example? Uh, just asking such questions without getting giving coding task and any theoretical question, just letting me know about my experience, whether it matches their requirements. So it could be any, but in most cases, I would say to be prepared for hour and a half session of the interview. And it's not okay to get the if the interview lasts much longer because the interviewers were tired, you are too much stressed, I believe so. So it's not okay to delay the interview, of course.
So is it like 45 minutes for the theoretical questions and 45 minutes for code task?
Well, I don't think I could help with answering that question because it could vary. Again, I already mentioned that it could be one big coding task for entire interview, or it could be several ones. So in most cases, let's say uh, again, based on my experience, usually first 15 minutes are allocated for the intro part because you're not expected to tell about yourself for too much. Several minutes is enough. About like 1 2 minutes, for example. So again, give only that information that is relevant for the company or for a project. Then the main like the entire time is theoretical and coding part, and the last 10 or 15 minutes is for the final questions to the interviewer.
Hmm. Okay.
So if we are
Uh,
speaking about having 1.5 hour interview,
okay. And for our core JS, for our like stage 2 interview.
um, more or less the same or even shortened to 1 hour. But again,
Okay.
it depends on how interview goes on.
Yeah, okay.
Usually, if the interviewer takes a full picture of your experience, of your knowledge, so most likely the interview could stop at any moment, for sure. Yeah, it's mostly depends on your answers. So, in case if you given a brilliant answers for the questions, so the interviewer could be shorter for sure. But I would say let's not focus on the time that is passed during the interview and on other things.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and one more time, don't be nervous because it's a stress not only for you but for the person who conducts the interview. That's the fact. Okay, is there anything more you want to know? 1 2 3. Okay, I will take the silence as everything is good, and I'll give full answer for your questions, and everything that was given today is uh, I hope it will be useful for you. But anyway, if there is nothing else to discuss today, thanks everybody. Thank you so much for your attention, and have a good evening.
Thank you
See
very
you
much for
tomorrow.
having me. Yeah,
Bye bye.
bye
Thank
bye.
you.